Congratulations to the Baltimore Ravens for winning Super Bowl 47. Sometimes the things most worthwhile don't come easily, and they surely didn't for the Ravens in 2012. This was a team that very, very early on in the season I felt was an elite team, along with the 49ers, and the other team for some reason was the Houston Texans. But two of the three teams I thought very, very early on were the elite teams in the NFL ended up making it to the Super Bowl. And the Ravens, for a good portion of the year, really did look like an elite team and looked legit. They started the season off 9-2, and you're like, man, this is a team that could go to the Super Bowl this year. But then they hit like a brick wall, and they really stumbled and struggled down the stretch. They went 1-4 in their last 5 games. They still won their division, but they didn't do it in the cleanest way, going 10-6. You know, the Bengals had the same record as them, and the Ravens just won the division because of tiebreakers. And you know, when you go into the playoffs and you've lost 4 out of your last 5 games, that's not really the ideal mood that you want to set heading into the playoffs. That's not really the wave of momentum you want to ride. But they dealt with the hand that they dealt themselves with, frankly. And the Ravens went on in the playoffs to, I think, turn it up and just become an entirely different team. They beat the Colts 24-9 at home. Then they went to Denver and beat them 38-35 in double overtime. Then they went to New England and beat Tom Brady and the Patriots 28-13 and looked very dominant in the second half in doing so. Then in the Super Bowl, beating San Francisco 34-31. And it was an impressive thing to watch. I mean, this was a team that looked like, you know, early on in the season was a real Super Bowl contender, really faded badly, and then managed to find that magic and become the team that I thought they could potentially be at the beginning of the year. And I think a large part of that has to do with the offense, in particular the development and growth of Joe Flacco. For many years, the Ravens team has had this stigma of being a defense-first team, and I think even a lot of Ravens fans will acknowledge this, is that over the past few years, that Ravens defense hasn't been as good as people might think. And at times, they've looked very bad against really good offenses, and it's been more and more Flacco in the offense that has had to shoulder more of the burden of helping the Ravens win football games. And I think you saw that especially in 2012 during the regular season and in particular during the playoffs. Flacco, in terms of his regular season, he had 3,800 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. So a pretty good year. Not what you would classify as an elite year from a quarterback, but I thought it was his best season to date. He has a real stud in the backfield in Ray Rice, 1,600 all-purpose yards for him. 10 touchdowns. And I really like the backfield combination of Ray Rice and Bernard Pierce, one of the best 1-2 combos in the NFL, in my opinion. And you look at guys like Anquan Bolden and Torrey Smith and Pitta and Dixon at tight end. You know, slowly but secretly almost, the Ravens really assembled themselves a nice weaponry for Flacco to work with on the offensive side of the football. But ultimately, it comes down to the performances of Joe Flacco in the playoffs. In 4 playoff games, he beat Andrew Luck, who everybody believes is going to be a big-time franchise quarterback in the NFL for many years to come. He beat Peyton Manning and outplayed him. On top of that, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in Peyton Manning's place. Then he goes to New England, beats Tom Brady, again, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, in his place. And then beats Colin Kaepernick in the Super Bowl. Again, a young quarterback with a ton of upside that a lot of people believe is going to be a franchise quarterback for many years to come. And not only did he beat all 4 of these quarterbacks, you could argue he outplayed all 4 of these quarterbacks, including 2 future first-ballot Hall of Famers in their places in 4 playoff games, including the Super Bowl. Flacco had 1,140 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and only lost 1 fumble. So that's an 11-to-1 touchdown-to-turnover ratio from the quarterback position while averaging almost 300 passing yards per game. And the great thing about Flacco is they had a lot of big plays in the passing game. They weren't just throwing 3 or 5 yard passes exclusively. They were throwing the ball 15, 20, or more yards down the field. They were able to come up with big plays at big times when they really needed them. Defensively, this was a Ravens team that was middle of the road statistically, which is about what I expected out of them in 2012. They have a nice balance of youth and experience. You know, older guys like Ray Lewis, obviously, and Terrell Suggs and Ed Reed. But they've got some nice young players on the defense, too, still, like Haloti Ngata and, if I could talk, and Kruger and Arthur Jones and Ellerby. I mean, there are some nice players on this defense, both with experience and younger players as well. And I think at times the Ravens defense, while they might not have been the best or most dominant unit, They made plays when they needed to, when it really mattered. And sometimes that's all you need out of your defense. They don't have to dominate, for 60 minutes of the game. Sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. But when you need to make a stop, when you need to make that big play, can the defense find a way to come through? And the Ravens defense did, especially in the playoffs in this 2012 season. Now, for the Ravens, it's going to get very interesting because this offseason could get very ugly because they have a lot of guys and a lot of top guys at that are going to be free agents. Now, first of all, we know Ray Lewis, arguably the greatest middle linebacker of all time, is going to retire. So the guy that has been the franchise player, you could argue, for 17 seasons now, really, is no longer going to be there. I mean, this was the man. When people think Baltimore now, they think about the Ravens and they think about Ray Lewis. And they think about Baltimore and the Ravens because of Ray Lewis. Not having him and his leadership and his presence in the middle, even though he's not nearly the player he used to be even 3-4 years ago, it's going to leave a gaping void. And then you've got the quarterback situation, Joe Flacco. I'm not saying the Ravens are going to let him go. They can't do that. But they're going to have to pay him like he's an elite quarterback, no matter whether you think he is or not. They're going to have to pay him like one. He's going to take a shit ton of money under the cap for several years. And you got guys like Ed Reed, who may retire, or who may want to go play for somebody like the Patriots or somewhere else. You got guys like Paul Kruger and Donnell Ellerbe and Dennis Pitta and Bryant McKinney and Kerry Williams and Ed Dixon that are either unrestricted free agents or restricted free agents. The bottom line is they've got a lot of guys that they're going to have to take care of. Are they going to have to cut Anquan Boldin due to salary cap constraints? We could potentially be looking at a team for the Ravens that is defending their Super Bowl title in 2013 that has several new starters on defense and a couple of new starters potentially on offense, which is part of the challenge in today's NFL of winning a Super Bowl one and then trying to come back and repeat the next year. And especially when you look at the Ravens, boy, they've got a lot of holes they're potentially going to have to address, and or they're going to have to get creative, really creative, to try and keep most, if not all, of these guys, and that might very well be impossible to do. Now, Ozzie Newsome, the Ravens general manager, and the front office in Baltimore get a lot of credit for the job they've done in building this Ravens team into a Super Bowl winner. And they deserve a lot of credit, in part because they've drafted very well over the years or made a key move here or there, like trading for an Anquan Boldin, for an example. But when you look at the Ravens' 5-year draft history, every year they've brought in a couple of guys that have become starters or key contributors, what have you. You look at 2008. You end up, taking Joe Flacco with the 18th overall pick, and if I remember correctly, having to trade up a little bit to go get your guy, and then getting his featured running back, Ray Rice, your all-purpose running back, in the second round. So you got your quarterback and your running back in the same draft. Then you come back in 2009. You get Michael Orr in the first round. You get Paul Kruger in the second round. You get guys like Ladarius Webb in the middle rounds. And, you start to see that this team is slowly infusing itself with talent every year in the draft. And you figure at some point in time, this team's going to have to break through that glass ceiling and get to a Super Bowl and or win it. And then you look at 2010, Terrence Cody may not be the best player, but you look at that draft, and in particular, where everybody focuses on what the Patriots did in that draft with taking 2 tight ends in Gronkowski in the second round and Hernandez in the fourth round. The Ravens did their own little thing by taking Ed Dixon and Dennis Pitta, and that really made a difference for them offensively. 2011 brought him Torrey Smith. 2010 they also got Arthur Jones in, the 5th round? So they're finding talent early. They're also finding talent late. And that's even with a guy like Sergio Kindle having done absolutely nothing for this team. They still had a good draft class in 2010. 2011, like I said, produced Torrey Smith. You look at this year's draft, a draft that I was pretty high on back in April, that produced guys like Courtney Upshaw and Kalichi Osemele and Bernard Pierce. It produced several contributors on the Super Bowl team. And when you throw in making trades for Anquan Boldin, when you throw in signing a Jacoby Jones as a free agent, when you already have players in place like Marshall Yanda and Haloti Ngata and Terrell Suggs and Ed Reed and Ray Lewis because of your success in previous drafts, it's not hard to figure out why the Ravens have been to the playoffs each of Joe Flacco's 5 seasons as a starting quarterback in the NFL. because every year they have a good base of talent, and every year they add to the talent. If they lose anybody, it's plugged in and replaced somewhere else. Every year they're a contender to some degree. And it's not a surprise to me that they finally broke through this year, in large part due to how well they have drafted over the years under Ozzie Newsome and that front office in Baltimore. Now, like I said, the Ravens organization, Ravens fans have a lot to be happy about and have a lot to be proud of. This is a team that clearly deserved the position it was put in and put itself in, and they won a Super Bowl. That's the second Super Bowl title the Baltimore Ravens have won. Congratulations. And when you look at these Super Bowl champs, this is still a team with a lot of talent. But like I mentioned before in this video, this is a team that could potentially see some major key contributors not be there in 2013. Look, I believe Joe Flacco is going to get paid. He's going to get paid. That's Baltimore's fault for not re-signing him before the 2012 season. Now, we'll let him prove it. Yeah, he proved it. All right, he's about to get paid $20 million plus a year, bitch. Yeah, how's that feel, Bashotti? Wish you would have paid him now, huh? But you have other guys like Pitta and Dixon, both restricted free agents, but you're probably going to re-sign both of those. Maybe a guy like Arthur Jones is going to be re-signed. You'd have to assume they're probably going to try and re-sign Paul Kruger. They have a lot of guys they're going to have to take care of. And all the while, guys like Ed Reed may want to retire, or he may want to go somewhere else and play. Ray Lewis is retiring. Anquan Bolden could be a salary cap cut. There could potentially be a lot of talent and still a lot of holes and a lot of things that need to be addressed. This could be a Super Bowl champion that's coming back in 2013, like I mentioned before, with quite a bit of roster turnover and many voids that need to be filled. On the offensive side of the football, you could say that this team was trying to play Michael Orr at left tackle, and then they ended up putting Bryant McKinnie there and put Michael Orr back on the right side. And McKinney's not a young spring chicken, and he's a free agent anyways. You could argue that left tackle could potentially be a big need for this team, especially in the future. You could argue if Anquan Bolden's being let go, even if you want to go with Torrey Smith and Jacoby Jones, they could probably use a nice physical possession receiver. That's something they could be addressing in this draft. I would expect the majority of the Ravens draft, even though I think they're going to continue on with the philosophy of taking the best player available regardless of position, I would expect that they would manage to manufacture and maneuver their board in such a way where their primary emphasis will be on getting some youth and talent on the defensive side of the football. Flat out. Ellerby's a free agent, and Ray Lewis is retiring. Even if you keep Ellerby, you still need somebody else at inside linebacker, perhaps. The safeties. Ed Reed stays or Ed Reed goes, doesn't matter. If you find a guy who could be your long-term playmaker at free safety, you got to try and draft him. Defensive line, they could use some talent on the defensive line. You could always use more defensive linemen, I suppose, unless you're the Bears. You could use help at cornerback. You have guys like Kerry Williams and Corey Graham as your two starting corners. Yeah, you didn't have Ladarius Webb for most of the year, but still, they could probably use more depth and more talent at the cornerback position. More so, like I said, in this draft, looking at best player available, you're looking at guys that can maybe come in and contribute a little bit in 2013 and be mainstays for many years to come. You could be looking at inside linebackers like Kevin Minter or Monte Teo. You could be looking at safeties like Eric Reed or Matt Elam. You could be looking at corners like Desmond Trufant, Xavier Rhodes. An offensive tackle maybe like DJ Fluker. An offensive lineman like Barrett Jones. A defensive lineman like Kawan Short or Jesse Williams or John Jenkins or Sylvester Williams. There's all types of possibilities for this Ravens team in the first round. They're the Super Bowl champions. So with them sitting there at pick number 32, they could sit there and decide they want to trade up a little bit. They could just as easily decide they want to trade back a little bit. But I would expect them to still try and stick with some type of best player available mentality, which ultimately is the right thing to do. Ravens fans, enjoy your Super Bowl victory you got this year, because I wouldn't expect the same thing in 2013. Now, the question that's been raised a lot, is Joe Flacco an elite quarterback? My next video is going to address that very topic.